Welcome to California in Focus. I'm your host, Keegan Kernodle, joined by our California state reporter, Kenneth Schrutt. And today we're talking about the vote to overturn California's gas car ban. I understand they just voted on this. Kenneth, what's going on with this?
Yeah, this is just breaking news now. The U.S. Senate has voted to overturn California's gas car ban. This now goes to the White House for Donald Trump to sign. What happened here is the EPA in the last days in the Biden administration approved a waiver for California for its so-called Advanced Clean Cars 2 program, which slowly phases out the sale of new gas-powered cars, resulting in a complete ban on new gas-powered cars by 2035. This is significant because 11 other states and Washington, D.C. have adopted California's car emissions standards. This makes up 40% of the American auto market. These standards would have come in very quickly. Model year 2026, this is the ongoing model year for many companies already. We would have had to sell 35% of their cars as zero-emission vehicles. And if you're short on credits, you'd be fined $10,000 a vehicle, at least for states that have adopted the standard at the same rate as California. The ongoing model year 2026 requirements would have applied to Massachusetts, New York, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington. With Colorado, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, New Mexico, Rhode Island, and DC having to take on the model year 2027 standards. This would have been a huge challenge because even in California, EV sales as a percentage of total market share has been declining. We went from about 22% in the last quarter of 2024 to about 20% this quarter. That this really suggests that Americans are tiring or maybe cannot afford EVs as they are, or early adopters have already been purchasers of these and have not been sustaining their replacements with these units. Obviously, cost is a major factor. We see that the average EV financing payment is over $700 a month. This is extremely expensive for the average American family when a lot of people feel like we're already in an ongoing recession.
So why is California allowed to create its own air regulations, and why does Congress have the power to overturn these things?
Well, I don't know if you've seen a lot of old movies or TV, but they're all filmed in around Los Angeles, and there was really bad smog. We did have a reason for wanting to do this. And so California started regulating its air to try to reduce its infamous smog before the EPA existed. Remember, the EPA was actually created and signed into law by Richard Nixon, a California Republican governor who became president. So California was grandfathered in the ability to set its own air regulations in excess of the federal standard because it predated the EPA. So it has to get a waiver for each of these. And under the Congressional Review Act, which allows Congress to overturn a executive regulatory decision within 60 legislative days, it seems like they're able to overturn this. Notably, this was just done in the final days of the Biden administration. Governor Gavin Newsom went to D.C. to just beg for a large number of these waivers. He ultimately only got a few of them approved, and now it's starting to seem that the few that have been approved were approved too late, and that the Trump administration and members of the Republican Party in Senate and the House are going to succeed in overturning these.
What would happen then, looking forward if a court overturns this then?
That's a very interesting question because the Senate Parliamentarian blocked a similar resolution for the overturn of the gas car ban from being introduced in the Senate. It ultimately was introduced in the House, passed the House, went to the Senate, and that's where a vote was held on it today. But based on the parliamentarians' analysis, which we haven't seen, explaining why it was not possible to use the congressional review powers for this rule, we could see a lawsuit either block the overturning of the ban temporarily or overturn the overturning of the ban, which would result in a return to the existing advanced clean car standard. Let's talk a little bit more about what that standard would mean for automakers. They would face fines of up to $10,000 per credit they are short. There's a rising standard of what percentage of the cars that you sell have to be zero emissions vehicles. You can buy credits from people who are have excess credits, companies like Tesla or Rivian, or you have to start selling fewer cars. Remember, I said this is the Advanced Clean Cars 2 program. Advanced Clean Cars 1 has already been in effect and has impacted California and some of the states that have adopted its standards. A few years ago, Stellantis, which owns Jeep, paused all combustion engine, regular non-plug-in combustion engine basic inventory for their Jeep models. You had to special order them. This is something that already is happening in the heavier duty vehicle segment. I talked to SEMA about this, the Specialty Equipment Marketing Association. I've also talked to the California New Car Dealers Association. This changes what kind of inventory is allowed to be held here. This wouldn't mean that you can't go and buy a car in another state, though, and take it here if you really want to. But it just introduces a significant burden to people who want a certain kind of car for a certain kind of lifestyle that they might have. If you're a rural person who needs to go far into a lot of different places, a EV with its recharging time and possible overheating for heavy duty applications might not be right for you. So you would probably have a very difficult time buying a gas-powered car in these 11 states plus DC that make up 40% of the passenger car market. And costs would go up a lot for used vehicles that would be exempt from these requirements, at least in the local market. So you'd probably see a large arbitrage where all of the used cars that have sort of the cheap used cars that would have been available in other states could possibly end up shipped to places like California for sale so that people can avoid having to buy a new but very expensive electric vehicle. Remember how I talked about Jeep not keeping their regular gas cars in inventory? Well, while the standard version of the Jeep Wrangler costs about $30,000, the plug-in version costs significantly more. It costs about $50,000. So just to be able to get a qualifying plug-in that would not count against their credit, you're spending a lot more money. And right now, consumers don't have that kind of cash.
Now, General Motors, you said in your article that they supported previously California's regulations in the past, but have recently reversed that.
Yeah, so GM was one of the groups that had supported Gavin Newsom's growing emissions regulations, but it seems like they have come out against the ban. They supported the overturning of the ban in this case. And I think a large part of that is because EV sales are just not as high as they were. Most EV sales, you have a lot of these product lines created by automakers to meet regulatory requirements more so than consumer demand. These cars simply aren't selling. There are these Hummer EVs that cost over $100,000. Their resale value is incredibly low. Most people who finance these are underwater on their loans because what they've paid in loans and what they owe on their car is much more than what the car is worth. So they're just stuck in a hole right now. EVs lose their value very quickly because the technology changes so quickly and there's battery degradation that decreases the, use ability of the car over time. The systems are all extremely expensive to repair because, they tend to have the latest suite of safety and technology. It's just very expensive to replace all of those screens and replace all of those sensors when every single body part that normally would have been, a cheap panel that you replace. Now it has embedded sensors in it, and your computer car has to be reprogrammed. It's a very expensive way of existing. EVs were supposed to promise lower costs for consumers, but a lot of the technology that's been added on outside of the drivetrain is generally quite an affordable part, but all of the sensors, all the technology has made it very expensive to maintain and keep these cars on the road, which means resale values are weaker down the line.
Well, Kenneth, thank you for breaking this down for us. I look forward to keeping up with it with you and seeing where this goes after being passed through the Senate. Listeners can keep up with this and more at thecentersquare.com. Thanks for joining us.